Welcome to another interesting episode of Voice It by IEEE by Kerala section. My name is Akil Hakim. I'm the Associate Talk Manager at IEEE Pi, and today we have an interesting personality with us with immense experience in various fields. She is an award-winning marketer with extensive experience in the media and entertainment industry. She has worked for several high-profile companies including Netflix, Vice Media, and currently at Duolingo. Let me welcome Miss Tara Kapur.
Hi, Akhil. Thank you so much for that introduction. Great to meet you.
Yeah, ma'am, before we have a curated set of questions ready for you, before that, I just wanted to know how would you like to introduce yourself?
I think you've kind of touched on my professional experience very well. I've been working in marketing and advertising for about 15 years. Started out my career as a journalist. But besides that, I'm a really family-oriented person. I love to travel. I love to read and run. So that's just a little bit about me beyond my work as well.
Right. So I think so we can jump into the questions now. So could you tell us a bit about yourself, the early life and how you were abroad? How did your surroundings have an influence in your career?
Absolutely. So for me, I was really lucky to have parents that valued my education, and they disproportionately invested their income towards mine and my sister's education. So I went to a boarding school called Woodstock, which is in Missouri, where I grew up. And that environment not only influenced my career choices, but it influenced my life in general. So I think a lot of my outlook on life sort of came from those early days that I spent in boarding school. So I developed my sense of independence and confidence, just kind of living on my own and, being on a campus for about 7 years. I made friends from all over the world. So that, sort of influenced my understanding of different cultures. That's also where I widened my worldview, because I sort of experienced different people, had to live with them and sort of experience that life. And I also discovered that I loved running in boarding school. So we were in the mountains, and I was a cross country runner. So a lot of my passions came from that early stage in my life. And it's also where, from a career perspective, I realized I was really interested in the media industry. I was the editor of my school paper. I was the editor of my school yearbook. And I love the creativity involved in, telling a story, finding insights, meeting and interacting with new people, hearing their perspective. And then I also like the stress and the deadlines, that sort of came with getting something out quickly and sort of meeting those kind of pressures. And all of this convinced me that I wanted to be a journalist, right? So yes, my early stage could influence my career, but I didn't know it was marketing at that age. I thought it was journalism. I thought journalism was where I sort of wanted to be. And then from there, I went to journalism school and sort of became a reporter in the early stage of my career. But that's just a little bit about how my school days influenced my career choices.
Right. So, like, personally, you liked boarding school a lot. I think so that gave you a lot of, personally, in my story is like I was in Oman for like 10, 12 years, and I came here. Suddenly, I was put into a boarding school, and I stayed there for 5 days and I left. So that is my experience. Right.
Yeah. I think with boarding school, you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
It's two extremes, and it's kind of how you would adapt to it. And it is for some people, and for some people, it is really hard. So it's a difficult call on whether it's the right thing or not. For me, it was definitely a great experience.
Great. Yeah. So, you have said like, a long part of your childhood was education. Your parents gave a large priority to education, right? So, I just wanted to ask, what role did education play in shaping your journey, like from being a struggling journalist to a successful marketer? So, you had that transition. Was there any specific experience or lesson, that led to that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the funny part is education definitely played a big role from, me studying to becoming a journalist. And then after that, education didn't play much of a role in terms of where I got to where I am today, right? So what I realized, I made a lot of pivots in my career, and me taking some of those risks and making those pivots at the right time is what has sort of helped my career. I'm pretty much a self-taught marketer, and a lot of my intuition and understanding of marketing came from the baseline of being a journalist. So I was reporting on marketing and advertising when I was at Brand Equity, where I was for about 6 years. So I often call that my crash course in marketing, because that was where I got exposed to the industry, and I sort of understood how it worked, right? I was meeting the who's who, whether it was CEOs or CMOs or global leaders, and I was able to ask them questions, and any questions I wanted. So they could be difficult questions, they could be questions on what they would do differently, how they came to certain conclusions, what worked, what didn't work, and really analyze marketing. So it was kind of speaking to where the creatives, business guys, and I really started to understand the industry well. And I think after a certain point of time, I realized that I loved this space, and this crash course in marketing sort of built me to be a person who wanted to then be on the other side of the table, right? So I realized after a point that I didn't want to report on marketing and advertising. I wanted to create the content that people spoke about. So I started trying to figure out how to make my next move. And that's when I joined Supari Studios. And making that pivot was super difficult for me in my career. I had to take a pay cut. And I got this opportunity after a lot of rejection. Like I tapped on, I think, 50 doors, and most people said no, because I hadn't done it yet, right? Like I was convinced I could do it, and it took a while to be able to convince somebody when I hadn't had that experience. Um, but this was a super important shift in my career, because this is sort of what built the base for everything else that I've done. And at Supari, I was able to grow the organization from 7 to 70 people during the time that I was there. I co-founded Vitamins 3 during the time that I was there. And on top of it all, from an advertising and marketing perspective, I got exposed and got to work with a lot of really exciting brands. So whether it was Red Bull or Twitter or YouTube, a ton more. I was just exposed to what they wanted to do. I was helping them build their strategy, and that was really exciting to me. And then after I did that for a while, I realized that my personal learning curve was getting stunted. Right, I was about 30, and I was one of the most senior people in the room. Right, and at that age, I was like, there's so much more for me to learn, and there's so much more out there in the world. So as a personal career bet, I started looking for more global opportunities. And this was a really hard decision, because I loved that job, and it was very, like I said, very pivotal for me in my career. But after that, I joined Vice, and that's where I got exposed to bigger scale. So whether it was projects, budgets, all of that. And I was also exposed to working at a global company. And from there, I joined Netflix, where I was, leading series marketing for the brand. And I was working on campaigns like Money Heist, Delhi Crime, Stranger Things, many more. And now finally, I've made the shift to Duolingo English Test, where I'm leading marketing in India. And all of this sort of happened step by step. So I would say my education got me to journalism, and journalism got me to marketing, but it's all kind of been stepping stones. I do feel like I need slightly more formal education, and that's why I'm currently pursuing an executive degree while I'm working, because I do think there's some structure that I need to bring to what I'm doing. But yeah, we can discuss that in more detail in a bit.
Right, right. You told about vitamins 3, and actually we'll be coming to that also. And like you said, it's immense experience. Like all the you have been in Netflix and all those big brand names. So like personally, I'm also a self-taught marketer. I'm going into that field. Like I'm doing my BTech, and I'm currently working part time in a marketing
Mhm.
sector. So it's really inspiring to hear this journey from you. So
Awesome.
did you actually, I wanted to ask, did you have any mentors or teachers like who had a significant impact on your personal development?
So when I was growing up, um, I was the baby of my family for the longest time, so I was, I'm the younger of two siblings, and I was also the youngest among all my cousins, so um, I think because of that, I had a lot of strong influences from my family itself. Like I just learned from what they were doing growing up. And for me, my sister played a massive role in, sort of developing where I am today. She gave me a lot of guidance. She motivated me to kind of push my boundaries in terms of what I was doing. And then besides that, I've developed relationships with people in the industry, and I would call them more sounding boards than mentors. But I really believe in discussion. So I'm very open about moves that I'm making or decisions that I'm trying to make and what my doubts are as I'm making those decisions. And I use these sounding boards as people who help me evaluate, because ultimately any decision you make needs to come from you yourself, because only you will know what's right for you in your future. Like when I was moving from Netflix to Duolingo English test, a lot of people told me, why would you do that, right? Why would you leave Netflix, which is such a big prominent brand? And I knew what risk I was taking, and I knew what this could do for me and my career as I made that shift. But I needed those sounding boards to debate and discuss it with me when I finally make that decision. So, and a lot of these people are people that you either meet at different stages in your career, or it could be a professor. For me, my professors provided a lot of insight when I was a journalist. But as I moved to marketing, not necessarily the right mentors for me to have anymore. But I did find people within the industry that I could talk to. And I maintained those relationships. So I think maintaining relationships and making sure it's like a two-way conversation is a way I look at it more than structured mentorship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Just so actually, in the marketing field, right? What is your specialization or something? There's a lot of categories like influencer marketing or something which you find you the most passionate about.
For me, I think brand building is the most exciting part of marketing, which is probably the part that's the hardest to quantify. But it's what makes people care about your product or service, right? So when you're building a brand, it's a long term game, and there's a level of consistency that needs to exist, and there's a story that you're telling people, right? So you're not just talking about your product, you're talking about what made you want to create this product or be a part of this product, as opposed to why somebody should buy that product, right? So it's not about this phone having, you know, all of these features and products. It's about the brand of that phone, right? Like everyone wants an Apple, even though a lot of the Chinese phones out there probably have way more features as products, because you believe in the brand and that product because of that message and sort of how it's been built out. That's what I'm most passionate about when it comes to marketing. It's making people feel something, building emotion, making products have, I don't know, characteristics. I think that's what I find really exciting when it comes to marketing. And the biggest examples of this, and we all know it, these are examples that come top of mind when anyone talks about great brands. It's the likes of Nike, it's the likes of Apple, because they've built these beautiful narratives for their products. And that's what I love. That's what I love the most about marketing. But when it comes to work, you do it all. You do the performance marketing, you do the influencers, you do social, you do all of it. But the most exciting part for me is brand.
Right. Ma'am, I just thing is, you have been working in Netflix and now you are at Duolingo. Netflix, I think so, already has that, that big image, the tycoon image. And now Duolingo could be more like a startup. You could say, it's already big, huge, but still it's more, I think so, more in a developing stage. Right. So, I think so. Is there something more challenging and fun that drives you to Duolingo, that drove you to Duolingo rather than staying at Netflix?
Yeah, absolutely. You've touched on exactly the core reason. For me, it's moving from something established that I was comfortable in and I was enjoying what I was doing. But at Duolingo, it is a startup for me, right? Like I'm setting up the team in India. I'm sort of building things from scratch. I'm building the market strategy for my product. And there's a lot of people who don't know about the product. So while it's really big globally, there is a lack of awareness compared to a Netflix for that matter. A lot more people know Netflix compared to Duolingo, right? So I think that's the challenge that I find exciting because I'm defining what that brand could be in this market. And that includes doing really, really scrappy small work as well as the big market strategy. So, it's this combination of being market leader, but also being an individual contributor who's actually executing that strategy. But I like that. I like a sense of scrappiness. It's what I was doing when I was at Safari Studios as well. And I saw that journey from 7 to 70, right? So being able to do something like that, but in a bigger ecosystem is what I'm excited about.
Right. Ma'am, you told like you are now currently pursuing a management degree from IIM Calcutta. So how do you manage your academic pursuit along with the professional responsibilities?
Uh, that's a hard one. I mean, it is difficult to be honest, because time is finite, right? So there's only so much that you can do in a day or a week. And it felt, when I signed up for it, it felt like something that I could do. And there are definitely a lot of pros to it, which I will also tell you. But the biggest challenge for me is actually staying alert and learning, because learning takes time. You need to really absorb the material that you know, your professors are presenting to you. It's 3 hours on a Saturday, which is the only free time you get after a week of a hectic work schedule. You have exams, you have homework, you have projects. So there's a lot. And it's a lot more pressure than just 3 hours. So my initial assumption was, yeah, I can do it. It shouldn't be too difficult. But it turned out that it's actually way more than I thought it would be from a time commitment perspective. And you have to have that learning mindset. You have to, like, there's no point showing up for a class just for attendance, like the way it used to be when you were younger. You really need to absorb that information because you don't want to waste those 3 hours. Like you don't want to then have to repeat all the material because you want to use your time effectively. So I think that's a challenge. The other challenge is I'm primarily doing this course to learn and sort of widen my perspective on marketing and the work I do, which means I don't really care what my grade is, right? I want to get through my course more than be the topper of my class. And that's a weird complex because I know I'm just doing the minimum to sort of get through my course. I have an exam tomorrow, for example, and I'm not prepared the way I would have been when I was in college, which I need to be okay with. So that's the kind of battle that I'm trying to deal with in terms of just being okay with what I'm calling failure complex, because I'm not failing, but I'm definitely well below the bar that I would expect myself to be at. And it's not easy, but I have to accept it, and I've started to accept it. So that's the second part that I find difficult. What I like about it is that I'm it's a lower financial burden, number one. So I don't need to sort of take a break from my career. I'm still earning my salary. It obviously doesn't cost as much as doing an MBA separately. So that's one. And the second is I didn't need to make a choice. I didn't have to be like, should I take a break from my career and move on to something else? I was able to sort of do things the way I want to. And I like that. And then, like I said about, the grades, right? Everyone who's sort of in this class is in the same boat. Everyone's not aiming to be the topper of the class. It's not as competitive. It's more about group learning. So I'm seeing a lot of people who are my classmates who are supporting each other and kind of helping each other move along in the class and learning together instead of trying to compete and beat one another. So that's kind of what I enjoy. And then the third part is I'm able to apply these learnings immediately to my job. So I'm working on a project and I'm doing my classes, and then I'm like, oh, what I've learned in class, I can immediately apply to this project that I'm working on. So those are the benefits for sure, but it's not easy.
Yes, I relate a lot with what you said now. And now about your startup, like what was your inspiration to go ahead with your startup vitamins tree?
Yeah, so Vitamins 3 was something I launched with the team at Supari Studios. I co-founded it with another colleague of mine who was at the org at the time. And I mean, the primary objective behind it was we were feminists, right? We are feminists. And the narrative was sort of, a lot of people just don't understand what the basics of that is and what it means. And if you do, ultimately, everyone would just say that easily. Everyone would be like, yeah, we're feminists because you're fighting for equality. You're not fighting for anything else. You're not trying to have a superiority complex or those kind of things. Um, and there was a big gap in the market of women having these conversations, um, whether it was about their bodies, whether it was about their careers, about financial management, about fashion. There was nobody sort of talking about it from a edutainment with an edutainment lens. It was either pure play entertainment or boring education, right? There was nothing in the middle that was kind of creating community and creating discussion and conversation. Um, and that's what inspired us to create this. And what was great is that we saw a very strong response from young women because there was a gap and people gravitated towards this because this is where they could feel, this is where they felt like they had a safe space on the internet, which is really hard to find. It's really hard to find a community where you feel safe to be able to say what you want to and not have judgment. And I think that was something that we noticed happen with Vitamins 3.
So, ma'am, how do you actively manage that and your career?
I don't do that anymore. So when I left
Okay,
Supari Studios, I left Vitamins 3 behind. So it's no longer
right,
something that I.
right. Uh, Ma'am, you had now your experience is like immense from Netflix, Duolingo. You have your experience in co-founding a startup and plenty. If you were to talk about certain qualities that that was a boost to the success in your career, what would those qualities be?
I think perse- perseverance is one, which is just like not giving up anytime soon. So like I said, when I wanted to make the move from journalism to Supari, it was not easy. I had to really persist and push, uh, because I was convinced that that was the right move for me, right? So I think that's number one. I think the second is also taking a long view perspective on things that I was doing. So most people would not take a pay cut, in their career. And I'm not saying you should, but because I was looking at it from a long term perspective, I knew that taking that cut would reap me benefits in the future. So it wouldn't. And yes, I definitely had the comfort of being able to take that risk because I didn't have to financially support my family or any of those kind of factors. But I didn't look at my career with short term gains as the perspective that I was bringing to it. I was looking at it from a long term journey. And today I can say what I did in the last 10 years has finally started reaping me benefits. So it's taken a while for me to be able to get to a point where I'm like, I feel comfortable and I feel happy and I feel like I've ticked all the boxes of what I wanted to do. And I wouldn't even say all the boxes because there's so much more to do in life. But so I was saying, I think just having a long view helps build your career journey. And I think the other part is just very basic. It's just having ownership towards your work and working hard. If you do that and you showcase that you have ownership, people will value you and people will respect you. And that's super important because the network that you develop is a very, very strong currency that you will have in the market going forward.
Ma'am, like you told, brand building is one of the your favorite segments to work on, and I have heard a lot of people say that the Indian market is very sensitive to the prices, above the quality or above
Yep,
anything.
absolutely.
They look for the prices, and there's no brand loyalty. So, what do you think are the challenges in the Indian market, in the marketing segment, and how do you think, the overall working in the Indian market feels like?
Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely correct. It is a price sensitive market, but more than price sensitive, it's a value for money market. So in certain instances, you will see Indians willing to spend money, provided that they feel like they're getting value out of that spending, right? That's one. The second is, you're not trying to cater to everybody. If you try to cater to everybody, your product will fail for sure, unless you are a mass product, right? Like, or a mass market product. So those are the two parts. For certain products, you need to know what your target group is and what is their spending behavior, what do they care about, most importantly, and how do you build trust with them for them to believe that your product is giving them value, right? When you look at Apple, and I used that example earlier, people see value in their products, which is not necessarily tangible. They see value in the design, in that Apple logo. There's pride that comes with it that is not necessarily tangible, which people are still willing to spend on. Now, obviously, when you look at Indian consumers, it's not people who are just like, it's not like a high volume of people buying iPhones, but the people that do will come back and buy an iPhone every single time they're buying a new mobile phone, right? And that's the consumer that Apple is going after. They're not going after everybody. So I think it's a long view that you need to take here as well. It's a long journey. You need to build trust. It's not easy to build trust because trust can be broken, and once it's broken, you said it exactly right. People are not going to stick to you just because they have done that 10 times in the past. There's enough options out there, and if you've not convinced them to trust you and you've broken that trust, they will move on. So I think having consistent messaging is important. Highlighting why your product exists instead of what you're trying to sell is really important. And standing for something and being authentic and having that resonate with the audience is really important. So making your product more human, more trustworthy is what will work for you in the long run.
Yes, ma'am. Now, as you said, trust building with the the customers or the audience is very important. So, how do you approach building trust with the like consumers, especially in the digital age? There's a lot of means to do that. Also, in certain cases, that has gone wrong too. So, how do you approach building trust with the Indian consumers in the digital age?
I think step one is understanding them well. You need to know your consumer as people, and you need to know, one, the size of the market, what do they do, what platforms do they utilize, what are their problems, and how can you help them, right? So when you humanize and you understand your consumer as a person and as a persona, and it's not just one, so within your target group or your target demographic, you will have 3 or 4 different personas. It probably won't be more than that, because those will be 3 or 4 key characteristics that your different profiles have as people, and speak to them. I really believe in consumer insights. I really believe in going out, and this is a bit of my journalistic side that sort of comes into action. The more you speak to people, the more insights you gain in terms of their behavior, and you find gems, you find absolute gems through those conversations. So I think number one is that, because once you understand a person, that's how you build trust and you build relationships. Think of how you build relationships with your friends, right? Why do your friends trust you? They trust you because they know you and they know things about you. So you need to look at your product as that friend, as that support system. And sometimes you want your friend to back off, right? So you also need to know where your brand should not interfere and not enter. So, for example, you see this so much with digital, where something is trending in pop culture and every brand wants to talk about it. You should not do that. You should only talk about places which is relevant to you and which is within your wheelhouse of your product, right? So I think narrowing down those things is what will build trust instead of bombarding your consumer. It's And look at it as any key relationship. Where do you draw the line? Where do you ask a question? Where do you be there as a support system? If a product can do that, you've won the game in terms of building trust. And there are enough products that do that. It's why you see some videos go viral. It's why you see people blindly buy certain products without understanding what it's offering as a product. It's kind of that.
Yes, ma'am. From your experience for in the marketing segment so far, Can you share any tips for aspiring marketers on how to make a impact on their roles?
I think the first thing I would say is be agile and flexible, because the world is changing really fast, right? And when the world changes, your consumer is changing very, very quickly. So you need to be able to pivot, to change strategy, to tweak things. And you need that flexibility. So being agile, I think, is number one, as something I would give as advice. The second, and this is debatable, but this is what works for me, so I will say it, is there's a benefit in being a jack of all trades instead of a master of one, just because you never know where technology is going to move and what's going to become redundant in the future. So if by chance you're a master of something that technology has taken over, then you're in a much trickier situation versus somebody who's a jack of all trades, who's like, okay, this side of what I know is redundant, but I can still focus on this side, right? So for me, I see a benefit in that. There's some people who would highly disagree, and there's some careers where obviously that doesn't work. But in marketing, I think being a jack of all trades is beneficial. And finally, I think you need to have a learner's mindset. What do I mean by that is you need to be willing to learn from anything and everything. There's a lot that you can learn from a conversation you have on the street, from watching a movie, from seeing the changes happening in the world around you, from attending a course, anything. Have a mindset where you're absorbing information and you're learning from anything that's coming your way. I think these three things would give you a lot of success.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, like, marketing is a lot of times, connected with creativity. Have you had a time like you have some deadline or you have something that you are working on and your creative mind is not working? And, is there some situations like that that you have faced?
Absolutely. So I think that's where I go back to the core, which is talk to my consumer,
Right.
because something will come out of there, right? And the good thing is, like, there's two parts. One is, especially when it comes to creativity and development, if you have an idea and the creative is okay, like it's not implemented perfectly, in that case, I would say it's good enough, because at least your idea is strong and there's a certain time that you're trying to hit and you want to put it out. If you don't have anything, then there's clearly something that's incorrect with your strategy, right? Because if you don't know what you're trying to do, then the deadline you've set for yourself doesn't make sense, because clearly you're not feeding an insight, your timing is off, you don't know where you want to do something. But when you're sort of creating a campaign as a marketer and not just a pure play creative, there's 10 questions you're asking. If you can answer at least 7 of those 10 questions, 99% of the time you will have something you can put out in the market. But because you're never starting from absolute scratch, right? There's already a brand identity you've built that you're just kind of consistently putting that message out around, right? When you're building something from scratch and you're a pure play creative, it's a much harder job. But for marketing, you usually have something to work off. So I haven't faced too much of a roadblock when it comes to that. The core challenge is between good enough and perfection, because if you're always aiming for perfection, your content will never go out. So sometimes you have to be like, hey guys, I'm pulling the plug here. This is good enough. Send it out. It's ready to be out in the world, because if we don't do that, it's never going to see the light of day. So sometimes good enough is more important than perfect.
Ma'am, as you said, perfection, from what you told before about your education and stuff, what I found is like you find it important, or at least used to find it important to be perfectionist. Did you have that trait, or you were okay with, having a good output?
So I think for me, I'm a big deadline person. So, which is also what sort of came from journalism and some of the stuff I used to do when I was in school. So I'm never a person who likes to push a deadline. So sometimes when you hit a deadline, that's it. So you can do iterations till that point. It might not be perfect, but get it out of the door is my mindset. It's always been my mindset. That doesn't mean I'm okay with bad quality. I think it's good enough is my benchmark more than perfection, and that's worked pretty well for me over the span of my career. But I think meeting deadlines is essential.
Right. Ma'am, like, have you faced any setbacks? Like, this is your career is very, it's going up, up, up. Is it always up, or have you faced some setbacks and, you think you took a wrong decision somewhere? Has there been any such instance?
Absolutely. I think everyone faces setbacks and challenges, in anything that they do. And especially when you work in creative spaces and you work in marketing and you work in advertising, um, you need to take risks. And when I'm saying risks, I mean creative risks, or like you need to have a point of view, you need to do something. And sometimes things go wrong. I mean, you could have done all the research, you could have gotten everything right, but the way that lands or the timing of it or something goes wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it. So sometimes you just get that backlash and you sit back, and yes, it's not great, but I think the one thing that I remember in those situations is that consumer memory is fickle. So at some point it's going to die down. So it's a bad day at work, you can recover from it, and don't make it be the be all and end all of what you do. And I think what you need to really take from those moments is use them as learning opportunities. So when I look at projects that I've done that haven't gone right, I look at them again and I'm like, if I had to do this again, what would I redo? And usually when you look at those projects, it's actually just one small thing that you would change, or one small detail that was wrong, or something. It's never the entire strategy. It's usually just one or two things that you would tweak to solve the problem. And when you realize that, uh, that's it. That's the difference between somebody trolling you to somebody being like, this is the best thing that I've seen, right? So I feel like once you're able to fine tune that application, you will probably never make that mistake again in your next creative, and it just makes you better with time. So you learn from every mistake. I think that's number one. And the most important thing for me is, especially in the career that I'm at, my job is not to save lives. I'm not saving anyone's life. So sometimes realizing that what we do is not necessarily something path breaking and like huge, it kind of quantifies the scale of what you've done, right? So sometimes you're like, ultimately, my ad is just trying to make somebody buy my product. It's not gone well. It's okay. I like nobody's died. So I think that's an important message out there, because I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a doctor. I'm not doing stuff that's life changing in those matters. And that's something that makes it easier for me to cope with failure, and then push myself to take risks and do something that could be path breaking. And then, like you said, ultimately, the stuff that you've done right helps you shine more. So it's a bit of a rambly answer, but I hope it gives you a sense of how I look at failure. It's not a
Definitely.
bad.
So actually, it's like you are doing learning from your mistakes. So that is what actually matters. So
Yeah.
you learn from that, and you make sure that you that does not repeat again. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this amazing interview session with us, for taking time off your busy schedule for us. And this was very, very insightful, and I hope this will be helpful for a lot of audience out there. Thank you so much again. That's it.